Hi guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my November wrap-up video. In November I read 7 books, which is still pretty good. I have read slightly more the last couple of months, but 7 is still very good. I also had quite a good month in terms of ratings this month. So my average rating this month was a 4-star. I read 1 non-fiction book, and I don't rate my non-fictions. I read 2 3-star books, 2 4-star books and 2 5-star books, which is actually really unusual for me because I normally only give out like 1 5-star a month, if any 5-star at all. So yeah, without further ado, let me tell you about the books that I read in November. So the non-fiction book that I read this month was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge. And I listened to this on audiobook because I've got into a real habit now of listening to a non-fiction book on audio when I'm driving to work and things like that. It's just a really good, easy way to digest non-fiction. So the audiobook was narrated by Rennie herself, and I really enjoyed this book. It definitely felt very enlightening and kind of uncomfortable for a white person to read, but it was very rewarding to read it. I say it was uncomfortable because it does kind of talk about some truths that aren't super obvious to white people, but when you're like told about it, you're like, oh yeah, I see that in my everyday life, whereby white people seem to be kind of uncomfortable talking about race, sometimes me included, for fear of maybe saying the wrong thing. Some white people might get super defensive about it, denying that racism exists or saying that it's not as bad as it used to be, you know, kind of shutting off any conversation because no, you're not racist, you don't think like that. So this book really tries to stress the importance of opening up about race, being open to conversations about race, not shying away, not being defensive, and just listening to the experiences of people of colour. Just actually listening and stop just denying that it happens and stop saying that you're not part of it because you're not a racist. Something that I've kind of grown up around is the idea that you don't see race, everyone's the same. Saying that you don't see colour is something that basically diminishes the whole experience of race and diminishes the experiences of black people and other people of colour who, for them, race is just something that is part of their everyday lives and affects them in so many different ways. And for white people to just kind of dismiss that is just entirely not helpful. It basically means that we will never improve or we will never deal with race as an issue if we just continue to deny it. So I thought that was really impactful, and I also really liked how she talked about the history of race in Britain, because even though I'm British and I went to British schools, I was always taught about race in America. It almost teaches you that, you know, it was really bad in America, but it's not that bad anymore. Or, you know, Britain, it's not that bad in Britain. But I had no idea about some of the things that were happening. I had no idea about, you know, different towns that I literally lived in being slave ports. I thought this book was really thought-provoking, insightful, and it did say a lot to me. It has, you know, made me feel a little bit more comfortable about talking about race, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to learn, and it's about being open to listening to people, learning from their experiences. Really enjoyed this book. I highly recommend it. It's definitely something that I think a lot of people, especially white people, should read. I'm reading all these non-fiction books, right, and I'm like, everyone should read this book. Everyone should read this book. I'm proper like on the non-fiction hype at the minute, and this one was no exception. It was very good, and I would highly recommend you check it out. So onto the fiction books that I read this month. The first one that I want to talk about I gave a 3-star to, and that was That Weekend by Cara Thomas. Now I have read another book by Cara Thomas before, and I think it was called Little Monsters. I think I read that in the summer. This book is on a similar level to that, where for me it's more of like a fun, fast-paced YA mystery. It's nothing like groundbreaking. It's not gonna stick with me forever. To be fair, it's not really stuck with me even now, but I enjoyed my time reading it, and that's all that really matters for this one. So in this book, we're following this girl called Claire, and she basically goes on a trip with her 2 best friends. Hello? Okay. Oh, my baby cat. So she goes on a trip with her 2 best friends to like this isolated part of the mountains, and they're gonna go and do this like hiking trail and stuff. So they go there on the Friday, and then on the Sunday Claire wakes up on her own, covered in blood, on this hiking trail. Her best friends are nowhere to be seen, and basically they're missing. So Claire has no recollection of the past 48 hours, and we're basically following her as she's like trying to remember what happened and trying to find out what happened to her friends. One thing I liked about this book is how it really slowly revealed what happened. There's a point in this book where it seems to be semi-resolved, but in actual fact it's not. To say this book was a young adult, I don't often care too much about the characters in young adult books. They're just sort of there. But the main character in this book, I actually really did feel sorry for her when everything like comes out about what happened. She starts to discover these secrets about her friends that she never knew, and I just felt really bad for her because yeah, like how do you live with your life knowing some of the things she found out? I don't know. However, one thing I would say about this book is that I don't really remember what happened, and I only read it a month ago. Like I remember some of the plot twists and I remember like the main points, but I don't remember how this book ended or like properly wrapped up. Don't know if that's because I listened to it on audio or because I don't know, maybe I just lost interest. But yeah, I couldn't really tell you exactly what happened at the end now. So it's obviously not been super memorable or impactful. Saying that though, it was still an enjoyable book and I had fun reading it, and I would recommend it if you want like a fun, fast little YA mystery. The next book that I gave a 3-star rating to was Trick or Treat by Katarina Diamond. This book was sent to me by the publisher, which is so exciting and amazing. I'm very thankful for the publisher for sending me this, and it was so exciting because it was like the first book I've ever been offered to be sent, and it happened to be a series that I love and would have purchased anyway, so that's good. But unfortunately this book was my least favourite book in the series so far. This book is number 7. As always, we're following our 2 main characters, Adrian and Imogen. In this book we're following the case of a missing boy who's been kidnapped from outside his house on Halloween. Obviously I read this book as close to Halloween as I could, however the Halloween vibes were not super strong. The only time it's really mentioned is at the start of the book when the boy goes missing and it's talking about how like the houses are decorated and things like that, but the Halloween vibes kind of end there. The reason that I didn't like this book as much as the others is that I felt the relationship between Imogen and Adrian was focused on way more than the missing boy was, and that's fine. There's some shit that went down in the 6th book that obviously had to be dealt with, and I thought that Katarina Diamond dealt with it really well, but something in me just kind of wanted that to, you know, take a bit of a backseat for a bit and for it to be more focused on the missing persons case. I felt that there wasn't a ton of urgency in finding the boy, and I understand why, but I don't know, it just didn't feel like as exciting and as dangerous as the previous books. I didn't feel like the stakes were that high at all, and yeah, I kind of knew it would wrap up nicely. But I did give it a 3-star because overall I did enjoy this book. My ratings for the other books in the series have been higher, and yeah, this just unfortunately wasn't my favourite, but I will still continue to read the series whenever the next one comes out, and that's all I have to say. So the next book I have to talk about is Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Iyamide, and this book is following these 2 characters, Chiamaka and Devon, and they are the only 2 black students at this elite private school. This anonymous texter starts sending really nasty messages about Devon and Chiamaka, revealing their secrets and just basically embarrassing them in front of the whole school. So for most of this book we are following Devon and Chiamaka as they, you know, try and stop this anonymous texter, try and find out who they are, try and find out why they're being targeted and what they can do to stop it. This book has been described as Gossip Girl and Get Out. I think the opening quotes are actually from Gossip Girl and Get Out. Yeah, they are. And that is a very accurate comparison for this book. It does have very Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars vibes to it, which I really loved, but it also has that hard-hitting race element that is also in Get Out. So yeah, really enjoyed this book. So this book does feel very dangerous. You do feel a lot about the characters. The stakes do feel really, really high. They're being followed, they're having pictures taken of them, they're basically being stalked. And when it comes out, like what's actually going on, it is just awful and horrific. I think she dealt with the social commentary in this book really, really well. There is a lot of talk about race in this book because these 2 characters are the only 2 black students at their school, but they also have a lot of different experiences in the sense that, you know, one is female, one is male, and one is from a privileged background and one is from a more disadvantaged area. They obviously face different levels of discrimination based on that as well as their race. This book also has LGBT representation. I thought that was really, really good. I especially loved like Chiamaka's story in this book. She was probably my favourite character. I just really like these characters, and I really liked where this book went and how it dealt with everything. I gave it a 4 because at the end of the day this is a YA book, and some of the parts in this book towards the end were a little bit like cheesy. That kind of thing wasn't really for me, but I also really loved how this book ended. I thought the epilogue was just perfect. It's both fun but also like harrowing as well. Highly recommend that one. And then the other book that I gave a 4-star to was The Rising Tide by Sam Lloyd. I read The Memory Wood by Sam Lloyd earlier this year and I loved that book. I gave it a 5 out of 5. It was a mystery thriller and the action at the end was just absolutely insane. I was completely hooked, completely stressed, and it was just a really, really good thriller. So when I heard that he had a second book, I was super excited. I gave it a 4. It was still really good, but I was slightly disappointed that I didn't love it as much as I did The Memory Wood. But The Rising Tide, we're basically following this woman called Lucy. She is married with 2 kids and they live in this really small, quaint fishing village in Devon in England. So there's this huge storm that's just rolling in and the family boat has been taken out into sea and there's been a distress call. So they contact Lucy and she realises that her husband might have been the one to take the boat out, which isn't like him. He should have been at work, but he's nowhere to be found and he's unreachable. And then things get progressively more and more awful. Sam Lloyd is just such a good writer. He truly encapsulated this small fishing village. I felt like I was there. I could just envision it. The whole town was just so vividly described. He also writes his action scenes so well. I really, really love his writing style. Towards the end, his books always seem to pick up the pace like so well and you're literally like, oh my god, what is going to happen next? Because you just can't stop reading. It is just that good. I feel like his books would be really good films because they are so action-packed. However, I don't know if this is me being picky, but I listened to this on audiobook and the narrator started to annoy me towards the end, so it kind of spoiled my enjoyment of this book a tad. There's this part towards the end where she's narrating about one of the children and she keeps calling him like the storyteller, the card collector, basically using all these words to describe him, and I felt like it was just repeated so much and I was just like, why do they keep talking about how he's like a storyteller? Like, please, I get it, like stop. And I don't know if it's just because I was like hearing it. I think if I was reading it, it would be a bit less annoying because I could just sort of skim through it, but having to listen to it over and over again was just kind of irritating. Oh, and also, like, I know this sounds like it's totally not the author's fault, but I finished this book when I was in like a traffic jam. I had to divert off the motorway. I was on my way to work. I was going to be late. It was a faff. So I think I was in like an already irritated mood when I was listening to the ending of this book. So I was getting more like irritable and just, I don't know, like it kind of ruined my enjoyment of it. But I'm fully aware that that's probably not the author's fault. It's probably on me. So I feel a bit bad giving it 4. But I do give my ratings based on like my personal thoughts. It's nothing to do with like the author's talent. If anything, I would say that this author is super talented and he's one of my go-to authors at the minute. The audiobook narrator was fine though. She was actually really good. I would kind of take this review with like a pinch of salt because I can't really think of anything to fault it except for that little niggly issue. Other than that, the rest of it was really good. Oh, and also, I think I gave this less than The Memory Wood because in The Memory Wood, there's this really big, like, twist, shocking reveal, and it, like, slapped me in the face. This book didn't have that kind of a reveal in there. There were obviously lots of, like, twists and turns. It didn't have me, like, gobsmacked or anything like that. So I feel like that also affected my rating. So I suppose that justifies it, doesn't it? If you're going to read anything, I would probably go with The Memory Wood, but either of these books, super good, and yeah, one of my new favourite authors. So now on to the books that I gave 5-star, and as I said, it's very unusual for me to give 2 5-stars in 1 month. The first book I want to talk about is Fallen by Fiona Macready. Now, I've no idea where I heard about this book or where I saw it because this is one of the least reviewed books I've ever seen on like Goodreads. It's actually crazy because this book was so good. I've also been trying to find this book for ages and I've never been able to like find it anywhere. It's not at my library. I found it on Amazon Kindle Unlimited because I've got a free trial of that. So this book starts with a plane crash and there's 2 women on this plane, one called Beth, one called Maria. So these 2 women die at the very start of the book. So Beth was married with kids and she lived in London, and Maria lived in Spain with her boyfriend. So we're then following from Beth's husband Tom's perspective and Maria's boyfriend Angelo's perspective as they struggle to deal with moving on from the death of their loved ones and just trying to like get their lives back together. And then at the anniversary of the deaths, like a year later, there's this big like anniversary memorial event and these 2 men end up meeting, and it's just a really beautiful book. I literally can't fault this book at all. The opening of this book was amazing. So the plane crash, we're following the perspective of the pilot, so we're literally in the cockpit with the pilot as he's trying to save this plane from crashing, and just the way it was written was just beautiful and emotional and amazing. The way that the author paints the lives of Tom and Angelo as these very different lives. Tom is a businessman, Angelo is this like painter in Spain. He lives in this like dilapidated flat, and they've just got really, really different lives, and I loved seeing like the contrast between them, but also the similarities in their grief. I really love the way this book is written. It's hard to explain it, so we're basically jumping back in time to how Tom and Beth met, how their love story, you know, started, and the last time that they saw each other. And then we're following exactly the same thing with like Angela and Maria, and when they met and how they fell in love, and then the last time they saw each other. I just absolutely loved it. It was so emotional. Well, I didn't cry, but I could have done. I was almost there. It was so much about love, and I don't really like romance, but it dealt with it in a very like non-romantic way. Just these two love stories basically juxtaposed, living very different lives, but going through the same trauma of this plane crash. And it was just, oh, mind blown. I can't believe that this book isn't more talked about, because it was just beautiful and amazing, and I'm just gonna keep raving about it. And then the ending, oh my gosh, the ending like got me. I was like, this is not how I envisioned it. Stunning book, loved it. Need to buy a copy of it now so that I can have it on my shelves. So that was my first 5-star. I absolutely loved it. And then my second 5-star, I did actually predict that this will be a 5-star after seeing other people's reviews, and that was The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This book is so confusing to explain. It basically starts with this guy called Ted, who is a bit of a strange person. He lives in this house with his daughter Lauren and his cat Olivia. So we're mainly following Ted, but we also follow Olivia the cat's perspective. We're following a neighbour's perspective. Things don't really make sense for a lot of this book, right up until the very end. And then you're kind of mind blown, because you're like, oh, that's what was going on the whole time. It was so layered, so complicated, but also so well written that everything made sense. It was just so deep, and that's all I could explain it. It was layered, it was deep, it was complex, it was so clever, and I can't believe that she like had this in her brain and she made sense out of it and put it in words. There were so many times where I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who the baddie was. It's just one of those books that I can't fault. I loved the writing. I loved the pacing. I loved the characters. Olivia the cat was my favourite character. She was amazing. I loved how it ended. I loved a lot of the characters' individual endings as well. I basically just loved it. But this book is so weird, and I would love to reread this someday, knowing now what I know and seeing all the little pieces come together, because as you're reading it, you're like, hang on a sec, like what? This was different a few pages ago, like what's going on? It's one of those books where you just have like an aha moment and everything just comes together. Oh, loved it. It was so good. I'm so happy that I read so many good books this month. This one and Fallen obviously are my favourites. To be fair, I enjoyed everything I read. I didn't have anything that I hated. And that is all the books I have to tell you about in this video. Let me know if you've read any of these books before and what you thought, or if there's any that you now want to read, or just let me know what you're currently reading, because I'm always looking for recommendations. I'm finally up to date with my wrap-up videos, kind of, so sorry that you've had so many wrap-ups if you are subscribed to my channel, which I would love if you did. Thank you for watching. If you could like this video and subscribe, that would be amazing, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!